I too was frustrated over the course of the summer when there was all of this energy around Black Lives Matter, but at no point were the very cogent and important demands being made by the movement tied directly to Joe Biden, any other representative, or to their willingness to vote for him in the upcoming general election. So despite the fact that Joe Biden was reliant heavily on the Black vote, as every Democratic candidate is, and despite the fact that he was, frankly, saying the opposite of what the people in the streets were asking for, trying to push back against any negative backlash, electoral backlash by saying, no, we're going to fund police more. There was never any threat to say, you have to do what we say or else we're not going to vote for you. And any implication that, any suggestion that should be the case was met with ferocious backlash and marginalization. You saw a couple of people speak out along those lines. Hip hop stars, Ice Cube and Puff Daddy, and they were largely maligned by people who consider themselves, I think, to be among the activist class, in addition to the more typical neoliberals, that you would expect to have a problem with that. Why isn't there more of a conversation about vote withholding and basically asking for some bare minimum in exchange for one's vote and directing energy in that more targeted way?
You make a very good point, because who doesn't do that either? It's the labor unions. They automatically line up for the Democratic Party, and they don't have a list of demands in 2000, 2004, 2008, 2012, all the way. And I say to Rich Trumka, the head of the AFL-CIO, and other labor leaders, What are you doing? You're just letting the Democrat Party take you for granted, for heaven's sake.
Yeah.
Why don't you demand labor law reform to make it easier to form unions? Why don't you demand? And Trumka told me once, he said, well, I got John Kerry to agree in 2004, running against George W. Bush, the war criminal, to agree to have a card check, where if the workers in the workplace just signed up a majority, they could break through all the rules and obstructions and present labor laws and form a union and then have a subsequent vote. Kerry never campaigned on it. Obama promised it, never campaigned on it, because they didn't really demand it, because the Democratic presidential candidates knew they had the labor union vote in the bag.
Yeah.
So this business of not having reciprocity, why should we organize for you? Why should we raise money for you in small amounts? Why should we come to your rallies if you don't sign on the dotted line? And I mean not just a throwaway piece of rhetoric. I mean a significant written position where you will say, if elected, I will send this bill to Congress. I will ask the committees to have hearings, and I will follow through. So, I mean, there was one time Dennis Kucinich, who was a loyal Democrat, and he ran for president. He was a congressman from Ohio, and they gave him a seat at the Democratic Platform Committee to develop the Democratic platform. This was a few years ago. And so one of his platforms was a stronger position on auto safety. And they wouldn't even let him get that in the platform. This is an arrogant, bureaucratic Democratic Party. I couldn't get through to the Democratic National Committee, Chairman Perez, for 2 years. It wouldn't return calls, no emails. Loyal Democrats like Mark Green, who ran for mayor against Bloomberg in New York City, he went down there. You wouldn't even see him. We wrote the books on Trump. We wrote all kinds of books the Democrats could use. It's total arrogance that's operating here. And they lose election after election against the worst Republican Party in history. I mean, there's no comparison with past Republican parties in terms of the evil, cruel, vicious, ignorant, Wall Street warmongering, bigoted Republican Party. And they until just recently, barely, they've been losing Congress, they've been losing White House, instead of landsliding them. I mean, look at this last November. 43,000 votes switched in Arizona, Wisconsin, and Georgia would have given Donald Trump a tie with Joe Biden, and that would have thrown it in the House of Representatives, where each state had one vote. There are more Republican states than Democrat, and Trump would have won. 43,000 total votes. That's how close to disaster the Democratic Party came to losing to the worst, most ugly, vicious tyrant in the history of the United States. Ignorant, bigoted, vicious, lawless, self-enriching, dirty-mouthed, misogynistic, you name it, right?
Yeah.
And he almost won. That's how decrepit and indentured and exclusive the Democratic Party is still. It's got to be replaced completely with new energy from the younger generation, starting at the precinct level. Look at the way the Trumpsters took over almost all the Republican state committees. They didn't have the numbers, they had the energy, and they showed up.
So there is an emphasis and an excitement around the growing number of progressives in Congress. Obviously, in 2018, we saw the founding of the squad, and now their numbers have doubled with Cori Bush and Mondaire Jones and Jamal Bowman, et cetera. But there is some concern among some parts of the left that they will be effectively neutered, and that the slow progress of creating more and more or getting more and more progressives into Congress will take so long that 30 years from now, when there are ostensibly enough, they'll sound like Nancy Pelosi did 30 years ago when she was the one championing Medicare for all. So what do you see as the role of an inside-outside strategy, and particularly the role of third parties in applying the kind of pressure on progressives in Congress to stay progressive?
Well, first of all, the left is settles for too little. I mean, they were so enthralled by the squad and a few other members, progressive members of the House. Well, let's examine that. First of all, they're a tiny number. Second of all, they spent too much time trying to deal with Nancy Pelosi, who learned how to neutralize them, how to shut them out. And then to top it all, these progressive members wouldn't return our calls. We've been around in Washington. We have a lot to contribute. We have a lot of experience. We can show how they can avoid pitfalls. We can show how they can rally inside the Congress with various people that they've never met before, because we know them. And this may startle you, but I have never gotten a call returned from AOC. I've gone to her office twice. I've met with the staff. I've called her, never gotten a call. The only one of the squad who's called back is Rashida Tlaib. Ilhan Omar, I came twice. I came twice to her office, very graciously received, and she came out once and just said hello. And I said, you're under tremendous pressure, Congresswoman, and you need support. You need ways of advancing your cause inside the Congress. And so she indicated that her chief of staff would be available. We had a little fun in the office. I called him 14 times, and he never returned a call over a period of 4 months. So this rupture between the national citizen groups and progressive members of Congress is not of our making. It's just members of Congress so busy running around, giving interviews, trying to raise money, fending off bad emails and all that. And they've lost the understanding that we cannot get anything done without them, and they can't get anything done without us, because our groups have millions of members all over the country, civil rights groups and labor groups and environmental and consumer groups, good government groups, etc. So I'm elaborating this at some length because we have the same problem of inadequate communication with your generation. You're like one of the few people with a network that's even called up for an interview. We can't get Jacobin, that magazine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and other young groups. It's like they're in their own bubble.